Welcome back to the show. Today we're looking at morality and religion. Joining me to discuss both sides of this issue are noted conservative writer and speaker Dinesh D'Souza. He's also the New York Times best-selling author of What's So Great About Christianity. And from New York, I'm joined by Peter Singer, professor of bioethics at Princeton University and laureate professor at the Center for Applied Philosophy and Public Ethics at the University of Melbourne. Let's get back to the discussion. And Dinesh D'Souza, we have an email which came in here from Ana Landis Velasquez. She writes from New York here in the United States. And she says, morals turned extreme have led to fundamentalist attacks. I believe one learns ethics and morals from friends and family, and they don't necessarily come from a religious belief system.
Well, I think, yes, here we may be confusing theology with morality. In other words, within religion, you have certain doctrinal propositions. You have it in Islam, you have it in Christianity, the idea, for example, of the Trinity. And no one would argue that the Ten Commandments, for example, a moral code, comes directly out of theology. Those two realms are somewhat separate. On the other hand, I do think that morality seems to require a transcendent reference point. Peter Singer said earlier, it doesn't come out of our nature as Darwinian primates. Well, that's very interesting, because where does it come from? If you think about the laws of nature, they seem to fully describe how every other object and creature in the world operates. If a stone is rolling down a hill, you cannot say to the stone, hey, don't roll down the hill. It would be wrong for you to do that. Or you can't say to a cheetah, it would be wrong to chase after the antelope, because it is in the nature of the cheetah to do that. So seemingly, according to Peter Singer, we human beings have this capacity to rise above our Darwinian nature and act, you may say, against evolutionary motives. Where does this capacity, unique to us as human beings, come from? That's the deeper level of the argument I'm trying to get at.
Isn't our
well, I agree that's an interesting issue. I think the answer is it comes from our higher rational capacities, the fact that we are reasoning beings and therefore can think about ourselves and our situation and understand it and develop theories of evolution. But I don't think that you've answered, Dinesh, if you don't mind, the point in the email, which is that religion can just as easily turn to fundamentalist views which have led to terrorism, for example, as we've seen. I noticed in your book, The Enemy Within, you acknowledge that the hijackers who destroyed the World Trade Center and killed thousands of people were pious religious people. So I do think
yes,
there's this problem on your views that...
Well, Peter,
yes.
I would say that the radical Muslims did do it in the name of Islam, but on the other hand, I would distinguish them from the traditional Muslims or the mainstream of the Muslim community that has not acted that way. I think also we have to remember that secular regimes, in the attempt to get rid of religion and create the new man and the new utopia, liberated from the shackles of traditional morality and traditional religion, have produced crimes that would even make bin Laden blush. I mean, you take an atheist, we won't even consider Stalin or Mao. Let's just look at Pol Pot in Indochina. You have the Khmer Rouge killing something like 2 million people in the space of 3 years. That's a lot more than bin Laden could probably even dream of.
But Dinesh, what about those scientists? Well, let me ask you this, Dinesh. What about those scientists who say religion makes for bad people and bad behavior? Those who use religion to rationalize acts of hatred or war. The examples they cite, for instance, are the stoning of heretics and adulterers and homosexuals, or the killing of disobedient children.
And I'm saying that those things are wrong, and historically they are a tiny fraction of the crimes that have been committed in the name of atheism. So look, any belief system can be abused. And religion has to answer for certain bad things that have been done in its name. But by the same token, the ordinary fellow who's not religious has also got to acknowledge that in the name of getting rid of religion, you have also had tremendous crimes that have been committed. And by the way, not 200 or 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, as in the case of the Crusades, but within our own lifetime in the last century.
Okay, let's get another caller.
Yeah,
this is
okay.
Bob. Bob's calling from California. He's been on the line for some time. Bob, go ahead with your question.
Oh, hi, yeah. I think I have a little bit difficulties believing that religion has something to do with morality. And my belief is that really morality is something that it comes from within. It could be a part of family value, culture, and all those things. And really, historically, if you look at the history, I mean, like something like you wonder, when you had this the Holocaust, whatever, why Christianity didn't speak up, or even in case of Rwanda. And when you look at all these examples, I get to this conclusion, really, religious doesn't have that much with morality, and morality is, again, something comes from within, and basically we need to respect the fellow human universe and all of that. So
okay.
I'm going to hang up and hear from...
okay, Bob, let me put that comment that you made to Dinesh D'Souza.
Well, if you look at most of the relief organizations that are doing work in the world, the Red Cross, look at all the hospitals that are St. Luke's Hospital, St. Mary's Hospital. The Christian tradition, for example, which I'm more familiar with, has done an enormous amount to relieve suffering in the world. There's absolutely no comparison on the atheist side. You just don't have atheist hospitals and atheist relief organizations. Essentially, atheism is just negative.
I think
it's defined.
Sorry, that's just not true. You definitely have non-religious relief organizations. I work with.
Well, but
Oxfam,
non-religious
example,
doesn't mean. Look,
yeah, I mean, it's not a religious organization. Of course, there are at least in the West there are fewer atheists than there are Christians. That's true. So it's not surprising that the majority of these organizations have Christians working in them. But they're not all Christian organizations. They're not all founded on religion.
But they are operating. But aren't they operating according to the principle of Christian charity, so that even the so-called secular organizations... Look, you mentioned earlier, Peter, utilitarianism. And utilitarianism is based on the idea of, you might say, adding up the happiness of people, right? The idea that each person's happiness counts equally. And see, built in there is this assumption of equality. And I would argue that that assumption comes to us from Judaism and Christianity. If you go to ancient Greece and Rome, the assumption of the equality of every human being just isn't there, is it?
Oh, it is. I'm sorry, you're wrong. It's clearly there in Stoic
where
philosophy.
do you find it?
I think that in the Stoics, in Marcus Aurelius, for example, or Epictetus, you find it in the Stoic philosophy. I think that's where that idea actually springs up from. I think it's pre-Christian in that sense, or comes up around the times of the origins of Christianity, if you like.
Gentlemen, I want to get another caller in. We have Hashmat calling from Qatar. Hashmat, go ahead with your question.
Yes, I was actually dismayed. Once again, we see that Al Jazeera is discussing an issue that is about religion and morality, which is universal, and yet you do not have anyone from the Muslim world, and yet Muslims are being discussed as a third party not represented in the show. So how does that work for you to go on and continue to do that without having someone from the Muslim world to represent? Because I'm sure if there was a Muslim scholar there, he would argue on the issue of morality.
Okay, Hashmat, your point is... Yes, your point is noted, but it is an interactive show, and in that way we're giving you a chance to have your say as well, which you've just had. Peter, I have a question for you, and that an email rather for you. It comes from Summer in Doha in Qatar, and Summer writes, I came to Islam about 30 years ago and adhered to the ethical and moral values that it imparts. But I was also a very good person before I accepted religion, having been brought up by my parents, even though they weren't religious people. You can definitely act out a moral life without being religious, but following religion definitely helps guide a person and helps teach him ways to maintain and strengthen his moral and ethical ideals. Peter, we just have a few seconds. I was wondering if you could respond to that.
Well, I think that's an interesting comment. And the point is that, yes, in some people, religion can reinforce already good tendencies that they have. But in other people, of course, it can lead them astray, as we've acknowledged with those terrorists who take religion to lead to terrorism. So I think you need to have an independent ethical judgment. That's the main point that I want to make. And some people can manage very well and live a very good life with that alone. Other people may find support in religion to bolster and reinforce it. But fundamentally and philosophically, I think ethics does not need to rely on religion.
Peter, my apologies. I'm going to have to break in there. We have to come to an end. We've run out of time. Dinesh D'Souza, Peter Singer, thanks for being with us. On the next show, we discuss the conflict in Georgia with analysis of what's at stake and the issues behind the fighting between Russian and Georgian troops. See you next time.